The sky churned like a living thing that night June 1943 black clouds, twisting over the Atlantic as thunder rolled across the horizon. Lightning carved jagged wounds of white through the darkness, revealing the silhouette of a lone aircraft slicing through the storm. The twin booms, the narrow cockpit, the unmistakable shark-like stance of its frame. It was a P-38 Lightning, the kind of plane usually flown by the most elite male pilots in the U.S. Army Air Forces, but the figure inside this cockpit was not a man, a slim, gloved hand tightened around the control stick, steady but trembling from cold and exhaustion. Rain hammered against the canopy as the woman leaned forward, her breath fogging the glass. She pushed the throttle, engine roaring in protest as if begging for mercy. The storm swallowed her whole. No escort, no official recognition. No record that she was even up there because she wasn't supposed to be. Narration folds into the darkness, revealing the truth history buried. There was a small handful so small they fit on a single classified roster of women, pilots trained for missions no one else dared to fly. Not for glory, not for medals, but for secrets. Secrets too volatile to entrust to anyone except the ones who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Brief flashes interrupt the storm enemy radar sweeping like a searching eye. A sputter from the right engine, the thumping pulse of anti-aircraft fire somewhere below. Orders stamped in thick red ink. Burn after reading, her voice shaking but determined crackles through the headset. If we don't make it back, tell them we were here. Then the radio cuts to static dot, and the storm closes around her dot by 1943. The war was swallowing pilots faster than new ones could be trained. Every month, more airmen disappeared into the fog of Europe and the Pacific, and the Army Air Forces felt the strain like a tightening noose. The front lines demanded fighters, bombers, recon planes. Anything with wings? And yet, the ferry bases back home were filled with aircraft waiting for pilots who would never return. That was when someone in Washington noticed something unexpected. The women. Not in the factories, though their work there was vital. Not in the hospitals or radio stations, but in the air. A growing corps of female ferry pilots, quiet, overlooked, and operating on the fringe of visibility, were delivering aircraft faster, safer, and with fewer accidents than many of the men. They had no combat roles, no defensive armament, not even military rank. But they flew under conditions most frontline pilots would have cursed at. Snowstorms, crosswinds, mechanical failures. Still they delivered. It wasn't long before whispers traveled through the halls of certain intelligence offices. There are missions too dangerous for our men. But these women? They might just do it. And so the files were pulled. The names were selected. And the letters plain. Unmarked, impossible to trace. Began arriving at small airfields across the country. Evelyn Pierce received hers at a dusty Texas base where she had spent 3 months ferrying everything from trainers to early model Mustangs. She was known for one thing: precision. Her landings were so perfect that ground crews joked the wheels left identical twin scars in the runway. She studied the sky the way a surgeon studies anatomy, methodically, obsessively, as if every gust of wind were a patient on her table. When the letter arrived, she read it twice, glanced around the empty hangar, and tucked it into her flight jacket. She didn't tell a soul. Lena Hartz arrived during a thunderstorm over Kansas. She landed an L-2 Grasshopper on a strip barely wide enough for a bicycle, soaked to the bone, laughing as the wheels bounced over the wet ground. Lena didn't fly airplanes. She wrestled them into submission. Low-altitude flying was her specialty, down in the treetops, in valleys where the world narrowed to a tunnel of wind and instinct. Officers said she flew like she was dodging ghosts. When her commander handed her the sealed envelope, all he said was, "You didn't get this from me." Margot Reyes received hers in a small workshop behind the mechanics bay. She was elbow-deep in the gutted remains of a P-40's carburetor. Her sleeves rolled past her elbows, her dark hair tied back with a silk ribbon. She could fly almost anything, but her genius lay in understanding how these machines breathed. She could hear an engine cough and tell you exactly which bolt was misaligned. She didn't smile often, but when she did, It was usually at the sound of cylinders firing in perfect harmony, she read her letter once, folded it sharply and locked the hangar door. 2 weeks later, the three of them stood on an isolated runway somewhere in Nevada. No insignia, no brass bands, no familiar faces, only a row of olive-drab tents, a scattering of officers in plain uniforms, and a silence that tasted like secrets. The training began immediately, from dawn to night. They ran flight drills, obstacle courses, and endurance tests designed to break their resolve. They flew under blackout conditions, engines throttled low, no lights, no safety net. They practiced emergency dives, forced landings, and silent approaches. They were instructed not only to fly, they were instructed to disappear. The intensity was suffocating, relentless. And it wasn't just the physical strain. Evelyn began keeping a small notebook of wind patterns and engine responses, trying to understand the new aircraft they were being introduced to modified trainers with unusual weight distribution. She barely slept. Sometimes Lena found her alone, staring at the stars as though calculating some impossible equation. Lena struggled with the simulations, designed to kill her instinct for risk. She lived for danger. She had no fear of it. But here they wanted discipline, obedience, silence. She hated the quiet. She hated the rules. Some nights she lay awake, gripping her pillow, wondering if she would be the one who broke first. Margot spent hours with the mechanics, absorbing every detail of the modifications being made to the aircraft. She asked questions the officers didn't want to answer. She noticed things they hadn't expected her to notice: reinforced electrical circuits, strange antenna arrays, and experimental fuel mixtures that burned hotter than anything she'd ever seen. She understood more than they wanted her to, but none of them walked away, because each of them, in their own way, felt the pull of something bigger than the war itself, an unspoken truth that they were being shaped for missions that officially did not exist. L5 liaison officers arrived halfway through training. Quiet men with expressionless faces, carrying clipboards and coded maps, always observing but never speaking unless necessary. They hovered around the edges of runways, watching the women take off and land, making notes in files no one else was allowed to see. One of them, Captain Roland Briggs, had the eyes of someone who'd stared down too much death. He called the women by their last names only. He watched Lena's reckless barrel turns with an expression somewhere between worry and awe. He monitored Evelyn's precision flights as though studying the gears of a clock. And he trailed Margot through the hangars, noting every question she asked and every answer she coaxed from the mechanics, though they rarely spoke directly to the pilots. The liaison officers made one thing clear: you are not here to be seen. You are here to be useful. 3 weeks later, on a moonless night, the summons came. The women were escorted to a dim operations tent. Maps were pinned across the walls: Atlantic shipping lanes, radar coverage zones, enemy installations. In the center stood 3 officers in plain uniforms. No medals. No names. On the table behind them, covered by a canvas tarp, was something large. Something shaped like the wings of a fighter. The senior officer stepped forward. You've been selected for operations that require exceptional skill, absolute secrecy, and no expectation of recognition. What you see tonight does not leave this tent. He pulled back the canvas. Underneath was the gleaming nose of a modified P-38 Lightning Sleeker. Heavier, its surveillance equipment fused seamlessly into the frame. Its unmarked hull reflected the lantern light like the surface of a blade. Evelyn inhaled sharply. Lena took a step closer without thinking. Margot's eyes widened as she recognized the altered wiring beneath the nose gun's experimental. Delicate, dangerous, these aircraft will be your responsibility, the officer continued. The missions will be unlike anything you've flown before. You will train alone. You will deploy alone. And if you fail, his voice tightened, there will be no rescue, no record, no mention of your service anywhere. A long silence followed. Then he said the words that sealed their fate. You fly at dawn. The lantern flickered, casting long shadows across the P-38's silver skin shadows that seemed to swallow the women whole as they stepped closer, unaware of how far this path would take them, or how deeply the war would try to erase them. And outside the tent, engines began to warm in the dark. They learned the truth of their assignment, one mission at a time, each revelation sharper, more dangerous than the last. There were no squadron briefings, no formation flights, no camaraderie of shared purpose. Only sealed envelopes. Only coordinates. Only targets no one wanted tied to the U.S. military. If they were caught, they would be listed as lost in training. If they succeeded, their victories would be claimed by pilots who never left the ground. Their first task came in a manila folder placed silently on Evelyn's bunk, a reconnaissance run over a coastal region in occupied France, an area so saturated with anti-air batteries that standard recon pilots called it the Iron Forest. The terrain was suicide-jagged cliffs, narrow ravines, and unpredictable winds, too dangerous for the heavy, slow reconnaissance aircraft usually tasked with the job, which was why they were being sent. The modified P-38 Lightnings sat on the runway like hungry predators, engines humming with an unfamiliar pitch. Margot had studied their guts enough to know these machines had been pushed past factory limits. They carried compact cameras instead of guns, extra fuel cells in the wings, strange antenna fixtures that monitored radio waves. She didn't know how those additions would behave at altitude. No one did. Lena stood beside her aircraft, helmet tucked under her arm, eyes narrowed as she watched the ground crew attach a black steel casing to her belly hardpoint. "That's new," she said. Captain Briggs answered from behind her, his tone as flat as his expression. "Experimental low-light camera. Don't bang too hard or it'll rip clean off." "Reassuring," she muttered. Briggs didn't smile. "Just bring back the film." Margot tightened her straps. Evelyn checked her altimeter 3 times. Lena cracked her knuckles. Then, without ceremony, the 3 women climbed into their cockpits and sealed themselves inside. The sky over the English Channel was deceptively calm, at first smooth, glassy, almost gentle. But as the trio pushed deeper, the air thickened with turbulence. The P-38s shuddered, lightning flickered far ahead, and their radios buzzed with a soft static like distant breathing. Evelyn was first to break the silence. "Approaching drop altitude in 2 minutes. Visibility low." "Copy," Margot replied. She tapped her gauges, watching her engine temperature creep upward. The modifications ran hotter. She hated that. Lena's voice came last, steady and fearless as ever. "Let's go wake the devil." The clouds swallowed them whole. Below, the French coastline glowed with the telltale white flare of spotlights. Search crews swept the skies in wide arcs, crossing and recrossing like the blades of enormous scythes. Anti-aircraft guns pulsed with orange fire in the distance. Evelyn dropped first, her lightning slicing between 2 search beams, camera shutters clicking in rapid bursts. She angled toward the cliffs, staying low, banking sharply to avoid the saturated zones she had memorized from the coded maps. "First pass complete," she whispered. Though no one had asked for confirmation, Margot followed, her breathing shallow. Her cameras rolled, capturing images of supply convoys, radar towers, hidden bunkers camouflaged under canvas. She felt the heat rise again under the engine panel and gritted her teeth. "Easy," she murmured to the aircraft. "Just hold together for 10 more minutes." Then Lena descended, her P-38 spinning in a tight downward spiral, skimming so low that the trees seemed to reach for her wings. Spotlights converged on her 3, then 5, then 8 of them sweeping upward in desperate attempts to pin her against the night. She ducked left, then right, dodging as if she'd done this 100 times. Her laughter crackled across the radio. "You can't catch me," she muttered. "Not tonight." But the mission wasn't over. Evelyn's radio suddenly hissed, then died. Static ate her frequency. She tried again. "Nothing. Comes jammed," she whispered. The words were more frightening than any gunfire. Without communication, one mistake meant disaster. Above her, Margot's right engine sputtered, vibrating hard enough to shake her teeth. She ran through every fix she could think of, flipping switches, adjusting mixture levels, Praying her knowledge meant something in the air as much as it did in the hangar. The engine didn't fail, but it didn't calm either. It hovered somewhere between survival and catastrophe. Below them, Lena completed her final sweep, but something sharp and white streaked up past her wing. A burst of flak. Close, too close, she yanked the stick, barely avoiding a second explosion. The shockwave rattled her canopy, but she forced the lightning upward, letting instinct take over where training couldn't. Done, she said through clenched teeth. Heading back. The climb out was torture. Engines overheated. Spotlights clawed their way upward. Radios coughed static. But slowly, painfully, the night began to stretch behind them. And then open sky. The coast behind. The channel ahead. No one spoke until their wheels hit the English runway. They climbed down from their cockpits drenched in sweat, lungs burning, legs shaking. Ground crews rushed forward for their camera casings as if they were sacred artifacts. Margot's trembling hands still smelled of overheated wiring. Evelyn's fingers were stiff from gripping the controls. Lena walked like she had left part of her soul back in France. But there was no celebration. Instead, a stranger stepped forward, a tall officer with polished boots and a frown sharp enough to cut steel. Intelligence Major Cole Harrington. He scanned the three women with open skepticism, as if searching for evidence they'd somehow cheated. "These are the pilots?" He muttered to Briggs. "Yes," Briggs replied. "They look." Harrington hesitated. "Unsuitable." Lena took a step toward him, jaw tight. "We brought the film back, didn't we?" Harrington's expression didn't change. "We'll see what you actually brought back." He gestured, and two aides carried the camera casings into a nearby tent. Moments later, film reels were spread across a long table. Officers hunched over them like archaeologists studying relics from a lost civilization. One of them pointed sharply. This is a weapons depot. We had no idea it existed." Another officer leaned forward. "And this look at the radar array? They've relocated their entire early warning network." A third rushed forward. "These photos will save hundreds of lives, thousands." Harrington's frown faltered. Evelyn watched the shift in his face. A small, private victory, but then Briggs stepped closer, his voice low. "You did well tonight. But understand these missions never happened. You did not fly over France. These images came from long-range reconnaissance. You do not talk about this to anyone." He looked at each pilot in turn. "Your next assignment arrives tomorrow." Lena felt a chill trace her spine. Margot clenched her fist. Evelyn nodded once, the weight of secrecy already settling into her bones. And outside the tent, the wind carried the faint scent of burning film evidence destroyed. Erased, consumed before it could confirm they were ever there at all. Their success would change the war, but their names would never appear in a single report, and the missions were only getting more dangerous. The more missions they completed, the more the unease grew around them, quiet at first, then louder, sharper, harder to ignore. Traditional commanders, already skeptical of the program, watched the women's successes with narrowed eyes. Every flawless recon photo, every night run completed, every intelligence packet delivered without loss. It all made the wrong people uncomfortable. "These women are overstepping," one officer muttered in a hallway Evelyn passed through. "They're a liability," another replied as if she couldn't hear him. "They're not meant for this kind of work." But the orders kept coming. And the missions grew riskier. The operation that changed everything began with another sealed envelope, delivered before dawn. Evelyn, Margot, and Lena stood in the briefing tent. Wind rattling the canvas walls while Major Harrington, still begrudgingly serving as their intelligence liaison, laid out the flight path. "You'll be flying into the Ardennes?" he said, tapping the map. "A narrow valley. Heavy fog expected, but enemy presence should be minimal according to last night's intercepts." Margot frowned. "Should be?" Harrington didn't look up. "That's the intelligence we have." Lena leaned over the table. "And how current is that intelligence?" Harrington didn't flinch. "You have everything you need." Something in his tone, too smooth, too confident, made Evelyn's gut twist. But they'd learned to fly without trust. They took the maps, ran their checks, and headed for their planes. The modified P-38s gleamed under a sickly dawn light, engines warming in uneven growls. The fog rolled over the runway like a tide. Margot ran her hand along her aircraft's frame, listening for anything off. Evelyn double-checked her fuel lines. Lena slapped the side of her cockpit twice for luck, climbed in, and sealed herself inside. "Stay close," Evelyn said over the radio as they rose into the thickening mist. "Visibility's going to be rough?" Lena's laughter crackled through the static. "Rough is my specialty." Margot smiled faintly. "Just don't show off." But 10 minutes into enemy airspace, something felt wrong. The fog didn't thin. It thickened, heavy, dense, unnatural for the forecast they'd been given. Evelyn banked left to maintain formation, but Lena's aircraft, usually close enough to see, vanished into the white wall. "Lena, report position," Evelyn said. No response. "Lena?" Margot echoed, worry sharpening her voice. "Where are you?" Still nothing. Evelyn's breath quickened. She climbed 100 feet, then 200, trying to break above the haze. But all she saw was a vast, swirling blanket stretching endlessly in every direction. Then, out of nowhere, searchlights tore upward. Not allied. German. One beam sliced across Margot's wing, flooding the cockpit with white. Another swept beneath Evelyn. Below them, the silhouettes of flak batteries materialized, dozens. Then more, hidden beneath the fog. This area was supposed to be clear. Evelyn shouted. Margot's voice trembled. "They knew we were coming." Enemy guns erupted. The sky bloomed with fire. A burst detonated so close to Evelyn's lightning that the left boom rattled violently. She spun downward, pulling back just before the treetops. Margot dodged right, the flak bursts chasing her like angry spirits. "They were waiting for us," Margot said, her voice cracking. "This wasn't a mistake." "Someone set us up?" Evelyn wanted to deny it, but the truth was screaming in the explosions around them. The intelligence had been wrong. Not outdated. Not incomplete. Deliberately wrong. She steadied her breathing. "We need to break off. Regroup west." Margot climbed to a sharp, shrill screech cut across the frequency. Lena signaled. It was faint, distorted, a single. Panicked, gasped. "Done nothing. Lena." Evelyn's cry echoed into the static. A flak burst lit up the sky where Lena's silhouette should have been. For an instant, just an instant, Evelyn saw the outline of a spinning lightning descending behind the cliffs. Then the fog consumed it, and Lena was gone. The survivors returned alone. Their landing was silent, hollow. The ground crew approached cautiously, as if afraid the women might break apart like their aircraft nearly had. Evelyn stumbled from her cockpit, her flight suit slick with sweat. Margot climbed down slower, every movement stiff. Mechanical. Only 2 planes, only 2 pilots. Briggs was waiting outside the hangar. But when he saw their eyes raw, hollow, his expression faltered. "What happened?" he asked, voice low. Evelyn thrust the mission map at him. "Your intelligence was a lie." Harrington stepped forward, tightening his jaw. "That's a serious accusation." Margot glared at him. "We were sent straight into a kill box." "And don't pretend you didn't know the Germans had reinforced that valley." "That information was not confirmed," Harrington replied coldly. "You were briefed with what was available." "Lena is dead because of your available information," Margot shouted, stepping toward him before Briggs caught her arm. Officers gathered nearby, whispering behind their hands. "They weren't supposed to come back. These missions are suicide. Maybe that's the point." Evelyn heard every word. Later, she and Margot were dragged through hours of isolated interviews. Different officers, different rooms, same questions. Did you deviate from the mission path? Did Lena break formation? Did your radios malfunction due to pilot error? And over again, "Did you see the crash?" Evelyn answered numbly, "No, she vanished into the fog." Margot repeated the same, but her voice carried a tremor of rage. "Because someone made sure she couldn't get out." By the time they were released, darkness had fallen. The base was silent, the hangars locked. The P-38s resting under their canvas shrouds like coffins. Evelyn sat on an oil drum behind the hangar, staring at the empty runway. Margot joined her, shoulders heavy. "They want us gone," Margot whispered. "Whoever sabotaged that mission, they won't stop." Evelyn didn't respond at first. She couldn't. The image of Lena's spiraling silhouette burned behind her eyes. "They picked us because we don't exist," she murmured finally. "If we die up there, it solves their problem." Margot exhaled shakily. "Then why are they sending us back up?" "Because the next envelope was already waiting in their quarters. Slipped under the door while they were being interrogated." Evelyn picked it up with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Night operation target, Rhine corridor risk level. Critical absolute silence, RQUIRD." Margot read over her shoulder. "That's suicide," she whispered. Evelyn folded the paper slowly. "We fly at midnight." And for the first time since the program began, she wasn't sure either of them would come back. The air hung thick with a silence none of them dared break. Inside the dim, makeshift briefing room, once a barn, now a sanctuary for impossible missions, Evelyn Pierce stood with her hands wrapped tightly around her flight cap. Her knuckles were white, but her voice didn't shake when she finally spoke. "So this is it," she murmured, eyes fixed on the grainy reconnaissance photo spread across the table. "The mission they said no one could survive." The commanding officer, Major Halden, cleared his throat. He looked older tonight, older than just a few hard months of war should have made him. "Intelligence confirms the facility here." He tapped the blurred outline of a valley surrounded by jagged black ridges. "Houses a weapons prototype. We believe it could alter the war's trajectory if the Germans bring it online. We need photographs. Concrete evidence. And no one else is crazy enough to fly into that fortress," Margot Reyes said with a flicker of a grin that almost reached her eyes. "Lucky us." Holden avoided their looks. "You're volunteers. You can still walk out." No one moved. Evelyn swallowed hard. "When do we leave?" Holden exhaled like a man who had been hoping, praying they'd refuse. "Dawn." Dawn. The word felt heavy, like an hourglass tipping over. The morning broke in a wash of muted amber, the first rays of sun catching on the polished aluminum of the modified P-38 Lightnings. The mechanics worked in mechanical silence, their faces drawn tight. They all knew what kind of mission required silence. Evelyn climbed the ladder to her cockpit slowly. Each rung felt like an oath. Beneath her boots, she sensed the hum of the twin engines. Beasts waiting to be unleashed. Lena should have been climbing into her own plane beside them. The empty space where her P-38 used to sit felt like a shadow over all of them. Margot slapped the fuselage of her aircraft. "Come on, sweetheart. Don't quit on me now." She glanced toward Evelyn. "You ready?" "No." Evelyn pulled down her goggles. "But I'm going anyway." The three aircraft roared down the runway, Evelyn in the lead, Margot high on her right flank, and Nora Dalton sweeping up behind. The air trembled at their ascent. A metallic scream against the early sky. They crossed over enemy territory as clouds stacked like walls around them. Nora's voice crackled through the radio. "Spotting for ground fire." "Nothing yet." "Stay tight," Evelyn answered. "Weather's getting worse." As if in response, thunder rolled through the canopy. The P-38s bucked violently in the crosswinds, lightning flickering across their wings like warning spirits. Margot laughed, a sharp, reckless sound. "If the weather kills us before the Nazis do, I'm going to be very disappointed." But even she sounded strained. The turbulence hit like fists. Evelyn gritted her teeth as the nose pitched. The altimeter needle danced wildly. She fought to steady the aircraft, her entire body shaking. For a moment, the world outside vanished in a white sheet of rain. Engines running hot. Nora's voice snapped through the static. "Cooling system's not liking this. We hold course," Evelyn said through the jarring. Vibration in her bones. They broke through the weather wall like divers breaching the surface, and the world opened into a stark valley, eyes sharp. Evelyn whispered, "This is the place." What she saw next wrenched the breath from her chest. "There," Nora whispered. "Evelyn." Look, at the valley's edge, half buried under snow and twisted pines, lay a wrecked P-38. Its tail number, unmistakable. Lena Hart's. Margot's voice tremored. No, that can't. That's her bird. That's Lena's bird. The mountains held their silence. The wind didn't even stir. Evelyn's throat tightened. She dared one glance toward Margot's aircraft. We can't stop. Not now. Margot nodded, jaw clenched, but her voice when she answered was raw. Let's finish what she started. They descended. The German facility sat camouflaged beneath a steep overhang, blackened steel glinting between rock formations. Anti-aircraft guns jutted like thorns. Lights out, Evelyn ordered. Stay low. Keep quiet. They swept in, engines throttled down to whispers, hugging the valley floor. Evelyn lined up the cameras beneath her nose, flicking the trigger. Click, click, click. High-resolution images rolled into the canisters above them. Searchlights snapped awake. Spotted! Nora shouted. Climb, climb. The valley erupted in flat black blossoms of fire hammering the sky. Evelyn yanked the controls back, the aircraft screaming in protest as they shot upward. Tracer rounds ripped past. Break formation! Evelyn yelled. Margot veered left. Nora banked right. Evelyn dove again, weaving between the detonations. More lights ignited across the ridge. Too many. We've got fighters incoming. Nora called, panic lacing her tone. 4 Messerschmitts closing fast. Evelyn's heart hammered. Margot, on me! The Luftwaffe fighters descended like wolves. Evelyn tightened her grip. Nora, stay behind me. Margot, take high cover. The dogfight exploded in a cacophony of ricochets and smoke trails. Evelyn rolled her P-38 into a hard dive, a Messerschmitt snapping onto her tail. Metal shrieked as a bullet grazed her left engine. Evelyn? You're hit. Nora cried. I'm fine, Evelyn lied, shoving the throttle forward. Margot swooped down from above, guns blazing. The Messerschmitt spiraled away in flames. Got one. Margot shouted. Her victory was short. Lived. Another German fighter slipped behind Nora, lining up a perfect shot. Nora pull up. Evelyn screamed, but the Messerschmitt was faster. Margot didn't hesitate. She rolled her P-38 into a dive so steep the airframe howled. She rammed her wingtip into the German fighter with impossible precision, a burst of metal. A bloom of fire, both aircraft plummeted toward the valley. No! Evelyn cried. Margot's voice came over the radio, soft and steady, almost peaceful. Make it count. Get the film home. Then the signal cut into static. Evelyn's pulse stopped. Her breath froze. But grief had no place now, not in the sky, not with Nora still under fire. She clenched her teeth so hard her jaw screamed. Nora, on my wing. We're finishing this. The remaining fighters circled like predators, but Evelyn's rage sharpened her instincts. She outrolled the first. Out climbed the second. Outshot the third. Her guns tore through aluminum and fuel lines, sending another Messerschmitt into the ridge. The last fled. Even warbirds know when they're beaten. The valley quieted again, eerily, impossibly quiet. Nora's voice trembled. Evelyn, Margot. Evelyn didn't answer for several long seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked like ice under strain. We survived. Because of her? And because of Lena, we get this film back, and they won't be forgotten. Nora sniffed, swallowing a sob. Lead the way. Their aircraft rose slowly toward the horizon, wounded but alive. Climbing back into the cold blue dawn, the camera canisters rattled softly in. Evelyn's cockpit, proof, evidence, the truth Margot died for, and somewhere behind them. The valley shadows swallowed the wreckage of two extraordinary women who had flown into a mission meant to erase them. As the sun broke over the mountains, lighting the clouds like embers, Evelyn whispered into the radio just once. For the ones who couldn't answer, we're coming home. And that was... When the engines began to sputter, the photographs were rushed through. Intelligence channels so quickly that Evelyn barely had time to breathe before they were whisked out of her hands. Men in crisp uniforms, men who had never tasted the thin Metallic air of a flak-filled sky huddled over the images like gamblers. Studying cards in a smoke-thick room, she stood in the hallway outside the briefing chamber, listening only to murmurs through the door. This confirms it. Bombing routes need immediate revision. Could have lost thousands, maybe tens of thousands if this facility went operational. Then another voice, cold and bureaucratic, classify everything. Level 5 clearance? No distribution beyond this office. A final phrase cut deeper than flak ever had. These women were never there. The door opened, and the photos disappeared into a steel briefcase. No one looked at Evelyn. No one offered gratitude. No one asked about Margot, or Lena, or the pieces of herself she had left burning in a valley the world would never know existed. Only. Major Halden paused. He touched her shoulder too gently, as if afraid she would break. You did something extraordinary, he whispered. But the world may never hear it. And then he too walked away. By the end of the week, the surviving women were separated, scattered across bases like loose pages torn from the same book. Nora was sent to ferry-damaged training aircraft in Kansas. Far from combat. Evelyn received orders routing her to Nevada escort duty for test pilots, who would never know her name, on her final night at the base. She packed slowly, folding her uniform with motions so careful they felt ceremonial. In the corner of the room sat her flight boots, still stained with the dust of the valley where Margot had fallen. She paused, staring at them. A tremor ran through her. She picked them up, then set them back down. Some burdens were too heavy to carry into the next life. Nora Dalton, lonely in the echoing corridors of a base hospital where she delivered mail and cleaned flight goggles, kept a hidden notebook tucked beneath her pillow. June 4th, sometimes I still hear her laugh. Margot, calling the sky a dance floor, telling us we could outfly death itself? I don't know how to stop hearing it. Sometimes I don't want to. They told me not to talk about the mission. But what am I supposed to do with the memories? She closed the notebook every time footsteps approached, heart pounding as if she were still dodging searchlights. Evelyn tried to return to the sky, but it wasn't the same sky. She flew test escort missions over the Nevada desert, guiding men who barked over their radios, "Stay tight, sweetheart, and leave the heavy flying to us." Sometimes when she banked into a turn, she felt heat bloom in her chest. Margot's voice, Lena's daring grin, the crackle of German fighters slicing through clouds. But then reality rushed back in the sterile stillness of American airspace. No flak, no shadows, no one who knew what she had done. One night after landing, she approached the base commander, a stiff-jawed man with a pocket full of medals. "Sir," she said quietly, "permission to request just once the status of Lieutenant Reyes and Lieutenant Hart, their remains. Their records." He didn't look up from his clipboard. "Classified." "Sir, they deserve." He lifted a hand, silencing her with a single dismissive gesture. "Miss Pierce, if you want to continue serving, you'll forget this mission you believe you flew." She walked out before he could finish. She didn't salute. When the war ended, headlines screamed the return of heroes. Cameras flashed. Bands played. Evelyn stepped off a transport ship into the arms of cheering crowds. Yet none of the cheers were for her. No one knew her story, or the story of the women who had flown past fear, past recognition, past reason. Her mother hugged her tight, tears spilling into Evelyn's hair. "You're home," she whispered. "Thank God you're home." Evelyn hugged her back, but inside, she felt the valley in her chest again, quiet, empty. Holding wreckage the world refused to see. Nora returned to Iowa, where the fields stretched endlessly and the air smelled of rain on soil. She took a job at her family's general store, ringing up flour and soap for neighbors who told stories about their sons returning from glory. Sometimes they would turn to her and say, "You flew transport, didn't you? Just supply runs?" She would nod politely, "Yes, just supplies," and swallow everything else. At night she took out her notebook and wrote by lamplight. September 9th, I dreamed of flak again. I saw Evelyn's plane vanish into smoke, but then she was standing beside me behind the counter. asking where we kept the sugar. Maybe the mind does strange things to protect itself. Maybe it's trying to keep the pieces connected, but the world wants us to forget. To tuck our stories into boxes labeled no value. She snapped the notebook shut when she heard footsteps, her mother checking the stove. The war had followed her home. Evelyn tried. Civilian life next flight. Instructor in Montana, crop duster in Texas, male pilot for a private company. But every time she stepped into a cockpit, she felt a ghost settle into the seat beside her. At first she didn't know which one. Sometimes Margot's laughter, sometimes Lena's fierce grin, sometimes both. One evening, she opened her own journal, something she hadn't done since before the war. The page remained blank for a long time. Finally, slowly, she began to write. I don't know how to exist in a world that doesn't know what we did. I don't know how to leave Margot and Lena buried in silence. A mission erased is a life erased. But I remember everything. Her pen trembled. She pushed forward anyway. Years passed. The world changed. New wars began, ended, began again. Technology rewrote the skies. Jetliners streaked across continents. Men walked on the moon, but Evelyn never forgot the mountains where she had left two sisters behind. Sometimes, on particularly quiet nights, she'd sit by her window, listening to the wind rattling the panes. To anyone else, it was only wind. To Evelyn, it was something else, a voice she once heard in the dark over a radio, crackling through static. If we don't make it back, tell them we were here, she whispered into the empty room, as if the shadows might carry the words to another sky. I'm still trying. And the night offered no answer, only silence. Wide and deep as the valley that held the truth the world wasn't ready to hear. The truth didn't return as a headline. It surfaced quietly decades later when a junior archivist at the National Personnel Record Center opened a dust-coated box mislabeled non-essential correspondence. Inside were photographs no one had seen in half a century. Blurred shots of modified P-38 Lightnings, flight logs with women's signatures carefully crossed out, intelligence reports stamped eyes only, and a single file labeled in red, Project Nightingale RES-RICTE'd. Within weeks, the documents spread across war history circles like wildfire. Not rumors, not myths, evidence, the kind that could no longer be dismissed or buried under classification. Stamps. A historian named Carolyn Voss, once a pilot herself, took the lead. She pored over grainy mission maps, faded maintenance records, and letters long denied existence. Names emerged from the silence. Evelyn Pierce, Margot Reyes, Lena Hart, Nora Dalton, and others whose lives had been carved out of the sky and then erased from the story. Carolyn stood before a panel of veterans advocates, her voice steady but trembling at the edges. These women flew missions that changed the war, she said. They risked everything without recognition, without protection, without even the right to tell their families. Their service wasn't forgotten. It was hidden. The room fell into stunned quiet. Within months, a movement began. Veterans groups, historians, families, people who had never known these women existed came together to demand their acknowledgement. A petition grew into a bill grew into a ceremony. On a crisp autumn morning, under a pale blue sky that seemed to stretch forever, the surviving relatives gathered at a small airfield restored for the occasion. A vintage P-38, painstakingly repainted in wartime colors, stood gleaming on the runway. Beside it, chairs faced a podium draped in flags. Evelyn Pierce, now silver-haired and moving slowly with a cane, was escorted to the front row. Her eyes glistened at the sight of the aircraft, its twin booms shimmering in the sun. For a moment, she was 24 again, gripping the controls, her heart pounding through smoke and darkness. The speaker's voice carried across the runway. For too long, their courage lived in classified vaults. Today we return it to the world. He listed their names. All of them. The living and the lost. When he spoke Margot's name, Evelyn closed her eyes. When he spoke Lena's, she bowed her head. Then came the flyover, a single P-38 roaring across the sky. Its engine note, cutting clean through the air like a long-awaited declaration. They mattered. As the aircraft vanished into the horizon. The final words of the ceremony echoed. These women flew for a world that never saw them. Until now. Afterward, people approached Evelyn with tears, gratitude, awe. But she only smiled softly, touching her fingers to the cool metal of the restored lightning. They were here, she whispered. All this time, they were here. The screen fades to black. Archival photographs appear. Real women ferry pilots. Test pilots, reconnaissance trainees smiling beside planes they weren't supposed to fly. Wearing courage the world wasn't ready to acknowledge. A final caption lingers. Their missions were hidden. Their sacrifices were real. Remember their names.